Good evening, Sukhi Hatu. Welcome to another weekly Facebook Dhamma Sharing with Brother Billy Tan. Please allow me to introduce Brother Billy. Brother Billy Tan is a retired Six Sigma business development consultant, and is certified as Master Practitioner of Neurolinguistic Programming, Clinical Hypnotherapist, Laughter Yoga Teacher, and Laughter Ambassador. In sharing the Dhamma, Brother Billy studied under the late Venerable Dr. Punaji Mahathera, and has delivered Dhamma sharing throughout Malaysia and other countries. In recent years, Brother Billy has also shared the Dhamma extensively in the Philippines, as resident Dhamma lecturer at Wisdom Park, Manila, as well as to Catholic seminary students, universities, theosophical societies, and to inmates at the women's prison in Metro Manila. Currently, Brother Billy is engaged in several humanitarian projects, to provide pandemic relief and assistance to underprivileged and marginalized communities in the Philippines, Sri Lanka and other Asian countries. Please join us to welcome Brother Billy, to offer his Dhamma sharing on the topic, Craftsmanship of the Mind. If you have any question pertaining to this topic, please post them as comments under this Facebook page. We would appreciate if you click like as you join this sharing. Thank you.
Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to another sharing. Today we will be doing Dhammapada Study on two very interesting verses, and they are concerned about crafting the mind, craftsmanship of the mind, because these two verses relate to the story about how a young novice monk noticed that craftsmen like carpenters, irrigators, and people like that, how they are able to mold and shape their environment. So in this case, we can do the same with our mind. And this is the story of how this young novice monk is able to shape his mind to become enlightened. And there is actually a very interesting story about his past life, which I will go into, okay? So for those of you who would like to download, you can download this link from this link, the presentation slides that I'm using for tonight, so that you can go along, you can share along and follow the presentation. Okay, so let us begin. Now we're going to, just a moment, we're going to cover two very important lessons. The first lesson is about, well, it's not really so much about karma rebirth, but it's actually a statement made by Kassapa Buddha, one of the past Buddhas before Gautama Buddha. And he declared about what happens when a person is doing dana and how he can spread the doing of dana through other people. Okay, and that is the first lesson about this, how in your future lives, if you do dana and spread the doing of dana with other people, how you can benefit in your future lives. So we're going to take a look at that one. So that's one lesson we can learn from this. And basically the second lesson is about the power of observation. You know, when we see something happening, it's very interesting, very important for us to see the cause and effect and the conditions that lead to an outcome. Because by doing so, by training our mind, right, crafting our mind to see things as they arise and see how conditions lead to outcomes, we will learn a great deal about life, you know, and we will learn how to purify our mind with that. Because this is really part of the practice of Vipassana meditation, to be able to see causes and conditions, to be able to see how various conditions arise to give rise to an outcomes, right? So the causes and effects and the conditions that lead to outcomes. So that would be the second lesson that we can learn, to observe that, right? So let us begin by looking at the first verse, and this is verse number 80. Somehow it's not so popular, but I think a few people have quoted this. So the English translation goes something like this. It says, irrigators channel water, fletchers straighten arrow shafts, carpenters shape wood, the wise restrain and develop themselves. So this is really a very straightforward statement about craftsmanship. Irrigators. Irrigators are people who plow the field and they dig up channels for water to flow into the field that they are planting and harvesting, right? So they are planting crops, so they need to channel water. In this case, especially planting of rice, they need to channel water so that the paddy fields will get water to be able to properly plant the rice. So that those people are called irrigators. They channel water. So they direct the water to flow to the right places. Fletchers. This is a word that refers to people who make bows and arrows. So they actually get bamboo and straighten them by heating the bamboo and then straightening them and making arrow shafts out of it so that they can shoot the arrow with it. So these are called fletchers. So they learn how to straighten the arrow shafts by using fire and straightening it. So fletchers straighten arrow shafts. Of course, we know what carpenters are. They shape wood. They take wood, they cut them, they plane them, they shave them, and then they make joints and make useful tools out of it. It can be the wheel of a cart. In those days, it's quite common, or a chair, or a table, or something like that, or the door. So they shape wood. So just as these craftsmen are able to work with the raw material they have, so for a wise person, his raw material is his mind. So he has to learn how to shape and mold and develop his mind. So this is really what this verse is all about. It has some very long stories behind it. I have cut short quite a lot of it. So we begin with the story about the past life, because here this verse is specifically referred to this young novice monk by the name of Pandita. So we need to go back to history to look at his past life, because there are some important lessons to be learned in one of his past lives. Okay. So in his past life, this novice monk was a poor man by the name of Mahadugata during the time of Kassapa Buddha. So we know that there has been many Sammasambuddha in the past, long before Gautama Buddha. Right? Gautama Buddha depends on which commentary you look at, but generally in the Theravadan tradition, Gautama Buddha is the 28th Sammasambuddha that is known. And Kassapa Buddha is one of the past Buddhas before Gautama Buddha. So during the time of this past Buddha, Kassapa Buddha, there was a contingent of monks who normally receive alms, dana, right? Dana of alms food by lay followers. And after a meal, usually the Buddha, or the head of the contingent, in this case, it's Kassapa Buddha, he would then deliver a message of thanks to all the people who have dana the food to all the monks. So in returning thanks at the end of the meal, Kassapa Buddha uttered this very important statement, right? And he basically was speaking to the lay disciples. So he said, "Lay disciples, here in this world, one man says to himself, 'It is my bounden duty to give only that which is my own. Why should I urge others to give?'" So in other words, he's pointing out that a lot of people are thinking, "Oh, well, I want to make an offering, so I'll just offer what I have." Right? What other people offer, that's not my business. Whether they offer or they don't offer any dana, it's not my business. So he noticed that some lay people are doing that. They are not concerned with what other people, whether they are offering or not offering at all. They are only concerned about their own offering. And of course, we also look around. we see in temples sometimes people are so eager to make their own offer, they don't think about other things, right? They only focus on whatever dana they're offering to the monks, right? So this is really what Kassapa Buddha was pointing out, that lay disciples have a tendency to focus only on what they're offering. Why should they bother with what other people are offering or not offering? Then he went on to make these important statements. So first, he quoted 4 examples. So the first example is this: so he himself gives alms, but does not urge others to give. That man, in his future states of existence, receives the blessing of wealth, but not the blessing of retinue. Right? So here it says, he himself give alms, but does not urge others to give. So in other words, here Kassapa Buddha is referring to a person who is only concerned about what he himself is giving, and he does not get involved or does not urge or convince other people to also give alms. Okay. Now, very important to bear in mind, this is not only talking about alms, but giving alms is a simple example of doing charity, right? Doing an act of goodness. This can also be referring to doing charity for the poor, right? But in this case, Kassapa Buddha was basically using the example of giving alms food to the monks as an example. But you can also apply this the same way to doing charity for the less privileged and the poor and the deprived. Okay, so here it says basically a person who only takes care of what he's giving and does not help or urge other people to give also, then in his future state of existence, that means in his future life, right, when he's reborn sometime in the future, he may experience the blessing of wealth. That means because he was generous, so he actually experienced blessing of wealth. He will find himself in a situation or being reborn in a family or an environment where he's quite well off. Right? He doesn't have to suffer poverty, but not the blessing of retinue. Okay, retinue is a very interesting word. It simply, if you look at the word retinue strictly, it means your followers, people who follow you, your disciples. But in this case, it is used generically to mean people who either follow you as your followers or disciples, or people who listen to your advice because they respect you, they look up to you, or people who adore you, people who admire what you say and what you do. So generally, people who look up to you, either as your followers or as listeners or as admirers. So basically, a person who is only concerned about himself giving and not getting helping others or urging others to give, he will not enjoy the blessing of having a lot of people who are his followers or are his listeners or are his admirers. So he will not have such benefit of such blessings in future lives. Okay, it can also apply to the present life in some cases. We will see in the story there is a reference to the present life of the person we're going to be talking about, this Mahadugata. Okay, so this is the first type of people that Kassapa Buddha was referring to. The second type, then Kassapa Buddha said, another man urges others to give, but does not himself give. That man receives in his future states of existence the blessing of a retinue, but not the blessing of wealth. So in other words, people who go around getting other people to give, convincing other people to give, urging other people, oh, you should donate this, you should donate that, but they themselves don't give anything. They themselves don't make any donations. Such people, they in their future lives, they could enjoy the blessing of having a retinue, followers, admirers, and listeners, but they will not enjoy the blessing of wealth because they did not themselves express generosity. Right? So they did not show such generosity, so they would not receive the blessing of wealth. Right? So this is the second type. Then Kassapa Buddha went on to describe the third and the fourth type. And he says, another man neither himself gives nor urges others to give. That man in his future states of existence receives neither the blessing of wealth nor the blessing of a retinue, but lives as an eater of remnants. Okay, we stop there in the middle of that paragraph. Okay, here, of course, it's referring to a person who never bothered to do any dana or do any charity. And he also does not urge other people to do charity. So such a person in his future lives, right, future states of existence, he will never experience the blessing of wealth because he was not generous. He will also not experience the blessing of a retinue because he was not urging other people to do good. Right? So this is the third type. Then moving on, the fourth type, yet another man not only himself gives, but also urges others to give. That man in his future states of existence receives both the blessing of wealth and the blessing of a retinue. So here is the ideal situation about a person who is generous and he gives dana and does charity. And he also urges, encourages, and helps other people to donate or give or do charity. So he's doing it both ways. He himself is giving, and he is also urging others, encouraging others to give also. And such a person will experience both, right? Two types of blessings, the blessing of wealth and the blessing of retinue. That means he will experience a more comfortable life instead of the life of a poor person, right? So this is really what Kassapa Buddha declared on that instance during that event, at the end of that dana, okay? And a certain wise man, and this is talking about a wise, someone in the crowd, one of the lay person who heard this, a certain wise man standing nearby decided to act in accordance with this and started going around asking the villagers one by one how many monks each person wished to sponsor for alms giving, and recorded down the offering. Okay, so he went around, but this wise person is also a giver. He's a donor. He's not just asking others to give, but he's also a donor. But he heard what Kassapa Buddha said, so he went around encouraging other people to give. So he went from person to person in the village and say, okay, how many monks are you going to sponsor at the next alms giving? Right, the next the next dana, how many monks would you sponsor? Some people say 1, 2, 3, or whatever. Okay. So some offered to sponsor 10, some 50, some very wealthy people will say 100, some even say 1,000 for those very wealthy. Okay. So and whatever they offered to sponsor, it was recorded down. And in those days, there's no such thing as paper, pen and paper. It doesn't exist. Those days, they were using some kind of organic ink written on leaves, dried leaves. Right? So they were all recorded on leaf sheet by the solicitor of the wise man. That means this wise person has a secretary. The solicitor here is not referring to a lawyer. It's referring to the person like a secretary. Solicitor is a person who helps him solicit, right? That means interact with people to get feedback or get something from them. So that is called a solicitor. You could say in modern day that is like a secretary, okay? So this secretary, the solicitor, recorded every person's offering of sponsorship. He recorded down on leaf, right, using ink and leaf, right? So it was all recorded in writing so that they have a record who is giving, who is sponsoring how many monks, right? What they will do is when they have recorded this, on the next occasion of the dana, alms giving, right, this this wise person, together with the solicitor, will be sending the monks to the home. So in other words, if this particular home say they will sponsor 10 monks, then they will send 10 monks to that home to receive the alms. Another household says they will sponsor 50, then the wise man will send 50 monks to that household to receive the alms. This is why they have to record it down on the leaf, okay? So it's very important to recognize that they are now recording it on leaf, so they have a written record which family or household is sponsoring how many monks in the next dana. Okay. And at that time, there lived a certain man so poor, he was known as Mahadugata, Prince of Paupers. That means the prince of the poorest of the poor. Okay, his name was Mahadugata. Now it's important to recognize the Pali term here, Mahadugata. Dugata is referring to a poor person, a poor man, a person who is more or less has very little possessions. Not a beggar. He's not a beggar. He's just poor, very poor. He can't afford many things, right? So Mahadugata, Maha means big or senior, right? So higher. So Mahadugata means a person who is extremely poor, right? So that's his name, Mahadugata. So there is such a person. And people tease him and call him Prince of the Paupers, Prince of the poorest of the poor, okay? And when he was asked how many monks he would sponsor, Mahadugata, of course, has no resources. He has no money. He can hardly get food for himself and his family. So he responded that he had no means to sponsor any monk, right? But of course, the wise man is very wise, right? So the wise man actually then spoke to this Mahadugata and explained to him what Kassapa Buddha was saying about giving alms and encouraging other people to give alms. So this wise man was explaining to Mahadugata that it's good for you to give alms, because then in your future lives, you may experience the blessing of wealth. And if you encourage other people to give alms also, then you will also experience the blessing of a retinue, right? Followers, listeners, and admirers, okay? So the wise man explained this to Mahadugata. And on hearing that, Mahadugata is a smart person. Even though he's poor, he's not dumb and ignorant. He's quite smart. When he heard this, he realized that it is good to give. And therefore he said, I can only sponsor one. He can't sponsor more than that, because that's all he can afford. I mean, that's the minimum number. Whatever he can raise from his own household, he cannot give more than one. He said he can only give one. That in fact, actually, he doesn't even have enough means to sponsor one. So he could barely afford to even do so, but he agreed to sponsor just one. Of course, when the solicitor heard that, he was a little bit disappointed. He did not record it because he treated it as, you sponsor only one, so I'm not going to bother with you. So it was only one. It was only one monk. Sorry, there's a wrong spelling there. So he could only sponsor one monk. The solicitor thought, just only one. I won't bother to write it down. So in a way, the solicitor was kind of looking down on him. Didn't bother to include him in the list that it was recording down. And that's not very good of this solicitor. But it doesn't matter. Mahadugata already decided, and in his heart and mind, he's going to do this. Right? He wanted to do this. So now Mahadugata went home. Together with his wife, they spoke about this. And the wife also encouraged and said, yeah, it's good to do that. Let's do that. But then they realized they don't have the resources to do that. They don't have extra rice in the house. They're so poor. They can hardly even feed themselves and their own family. So now together with his wife, they had to go out to look for odd jobs to quickly earn whatever they can earn in order to sponsor one monk. So just then, they went out and then they came across a very wealthy merchant. Now, I want to mention that this story is very long. There's a lot of details I skipped. I quickly summarize. So every statement I make here is a little bit of summary. So it's a long story. They went round from house to house. They finally came across this wealthy merchant. Then finally, this wealthy merchant told this Mahadugata, okay, you can chop wood for me because I need the wood to light the fire to cook food for the monk. So you can chop wood for me. So Mahadugata got some work chopping the wood. And then the wealthy merchant also saw the wife of Mahadugata could do something. And the wife said, oh, sir, can I do something? And the wealthy merchant is a very kind man. He also offered the wife to do other things like helping in the kitchen to prepare the food, right? Help to prepare stuff. So they both got some work and they're going to get paid. And in those days, usually this kind of work, people get paid with rice and oil and vegetable and fish. That is how they earn a living. They don't earn money so much, even though, only wealthy people carry money around. But the average poor person, he receives his wages in the form of rice, oil, vegetable, fish, or meat, any kind of meat, okay? So at the end of the day, after working for the wealthy merchant, the merchant was very kind. He paid Mahadugata and his wife with rice and food supplies, not only for what they earned as wages, but also additional, extra. Of course, this wealthy merchant may or may not know that Mahadugata wants to sponsor one monk, but he was so generous, very kind. So he gave more than what Mahadugata would have received as wages. So Mahadugata and his wife was very happy. They got more than their basic wages, more rice and vegetable and fish. So they are able to use that to make meals for the one monk they're going to sponsor. Okay. So this extra was given by the merchant as a sign of goodwill for the excellent work that they did for this merchant. The merchant was very happy about it. So the next morning, early morning, they all wake up very early, in those ancient days. So Mahadugata and his wife arose very early and began preparing for the dana. Feeling very grateful, they're so happy that they received this extra rice and fish and meat. So as they were doing their work, they were singing joyfully, because they're so happy, right? They seldom have that. And they were saying things like, today we shall have the privilege of giving food to the noble monks. So they're so happy. They are singing all that and happily preparing the food. Okay. It so happened there's a fisherman nearby who just came back from fishing and heard the singing. He was very, very curious. Wow, this couple is so happy, so joyful with the singing. So then he asked them what's going on and inquired the reason and asked Mahadugata. Then the fisherman also needed some help. Says, okay, Mahadugata, I have caught a lot of fish. Can you help me go to the market and sell the fish? I will pay you back in fish. So Mahadugata, of course, very happy. Now he gets even more work. So he started to take the fish of the fisherman, went to the village and started selling to villagers so that the villagers now can have fish for cooking the alms food, right? And after selling off all the fish, the fisherman rewarded Mahadugata handsomely with choice catch. That means the best fish that the fisherman had, gave it to Mahadugata and said, here are your wages. Thank you for selling all the fish for me. So Mahadugata now benefited from that even. So here you can see Mahadugata, even though he has not done the dana yet, but because from the purity of his heart and his mind, he wanted to do it. So this wanting, right, The Buddha has always said, Chetana, this decision, this willingness is karma. So in other words, if you're willing and in your mind and your heart to want to do something, you have already started creating that good karma. And that's what happened to Mahadugata. Because he was so willing, even though he was poor, he was willing to sponsor one monk. He had already created very good karma. And he is already here and now experiencing the benefit of, well, wealth, little wealth. For a poor person, a little bit more rice, a little bit more fish, that is wealth for them. Okay. So now Mahadugata and his wife had accumulated more than they needed for the dana, right, to one monk. So they actually now have excess food. They can enjoy the next few meals, because normally they go around trying to get food from people because they're so poor. They even pick the leftover foods of other people. Not so much begging, but they just basically see when people have finished eating, anything left over, they will ask them, oh, may I have it? You know, things like that. So they are so poor, right? So as they return home with their fish, now they have some very nice fish also. And their meritorious acts were noticed by Saka, the chief of the Tavatimsa Devaloka. So we know that above the human realms, there are Deva realms. There are 6 Deva realms above the human realms. And in one of the lower Deva realms is the Tavatimsa realm. And there, the chief or the ruler of that heavenly realm, right? Devaloka means heavenly realm. And that Tavatimsa heavenly realm, the ruler or the chief is a deity called Saka. Okay, you will find this mentioned in many stories. Saka, like chief of the Tavatimsa realm, and he noticed what is happening because you see, all these devas, they notice meritorious acts, and they like to go near and see people who do meritorious acts. So Saka himself noticed the good work of Mahadugata. Because Mahadugata promised to sponsor one monk, and he and his wife worked so hard to raise the necessary resources, means to sponsor that one monk. So Saka considered within himself, he says, yesterday Mahadugata and his wife worked for hire so that they might provide food for one monk. Now, Saka was curious, which monk will he get? Because the solicitor is supposed to send all the monks to each household. If you sponsor 10, the solicitor will send 10 monks to your house. So in this case, because he promised to sponsor one, the solicitor is supposed to send one monk to Mahadugata's house to receive the alms food. Okay. So finally, Saka came to this very interesting conclusion. He says, Mahadugata will obtain none other monk than the Buddha. Here is referring to Kassapa Buddha, right? None other than the Buddha himself, who is sitting in the perfume chamber with his thought in his mind. I will bestow my favor on Mahadugata. So Saka thought about it. I will now do something in favor for Mahadugata. This is Saka thinking that, okay? So now it is Mahadugata's intention to offer the Tathagata a meal of his own making, consisting of porridge, rice, leaf curry, and so on. This is actually very luxurious food. It's very, quite good food, nutritious food. So Saka was thinking to himself that he's going to help Mahadugata, right, offer food to Kassapa Buddha himself, and in so doing, he would be offering very good quality porridge and rice and curry. Okay, and in fact, he wanted to help Mahadugata. Saka wanted to help Mahadugata. Suppose if I were to go to Mahadugata's house and offer to act as a cook, So that's what Saka was thinking. How about I come down to the human realm, I go to the house of Mahadugata and offer my service as a cook. And that's what Saka was thinking, that he's going to do that. Right? So accordingly, Saka descended into the human realm, disguised himself as a cook, and went to the vicinity of the house of Mahadugata, and he asked around and asked them, would anyone like to hire a man to work for him? So in this case, as a cook, right? So Saka entered the poor man's house, the Mahadugata's house, and had him bring the rice and other articles of food, and then dismissed him and said to the Mahadugata, go fetch the monk allotted to you. So in other words, Saka was saying, I'm going to do the cooking. I will do the cooking for you. Don't worry about the food. You go and fetch that monk that you are supposed to sponsor and bring him back to the house, and then we will offer the food. So that, he doesn't have to run around doing two things at the same time. So Saka volunteered to cook for Mahadugata, so that Mahadugata can now go to the monastery and collect and bring back that one monk. Right? So now the solicitor of alms had sent to the house of all the residents the monks according to the names on the lists. So in other words, the solicitor has been dispatching all these monks. Yeah, so many monks, you sponsoring 10, so these 10 monks go there. You sponsor 50 monks, 50 monks go there. So he has been dispatching that. So when Mahadugata arrived, Mahadugata met up with this solicitor and said to the solicitor, give me the monk allotted to me. So asking the solicitor to do that. Unfortunately, the solicitor realized his mistake. The solicitor immediately recollected what he had done, his mistake, and replied, oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to allot you a monk. That means he forgot to write it down on the leaf. So all the monks had been dispatched already. There's no more monks to dispatch to Mahadugata's house. Okay. So Mahadugata felt as if like a sharp pain, like a sharp dagger thrust into his belly. He felt so hurt that, oh, I went through all that trouble and you don't have a monk for me. So he was very, very hurt. And Mahadugata said to the solicitor, sir, why are you ruining me? Yesterday you urged me to give alms. So my wife and I worked all day for hire. And today I got up early in the morning to gather leaves, went to the bank of the river and spent the day picking up leaves. Give me one monk, please. But the solicitor had already assigned all the monks. There's no more monks to be given. So Mahadugata was so upset, he burst into tears because he worked so hard for this occasion and now no monks. He can't sponsor any monk because there's no monks to be sponsored anymore. They are all already allocated and gone. So people gathered around as Mahadugata was lamenting. And they realized what was going on. They realized that the solicitor was in the wrong. And Mahadugata was very sad, right? And as he was then telling people what had happened, whereupon the people then asked the solicitor, is it true, solicitor, as this man alleges, that you urge him to hire himself out for service to provide food for a monk, and you didn't allocate that monk for him, right? So it was I cut short already. It's a very long discussion. The people were upset. They were scolding the solicitor, and they were saying that you urged him to sponsor. He worked so hard. He got everything. He got the food ready, everything, and now you don't have a monk. So they were actually very upset. They were actually literally scolding the solicitor. It's a long story. So Mahadugata then went into the monastery. He had no choice because the solicitor said, no, I have no monks to give you. So Mahadugata was very disappointed. He went into the monastery hoping to find at least one monk, right? So on previous occasions, Mahadugata was so poor, he would go to the monastery, wait for the monks to finish eating. Whatever leftover food, whatever food that was not used, allocated or consumed, he would then collect the leftover food. So he was known as an eater of remnants of food. In other words, he was known to be taking the leftover food from the monastery. Because of course they don't want to throw the food away, and people like him, very poor, cannot afford their own food. They go to the monastery and they collect the leftover food, right? Now just pause here for a minute. For those of you who are familiar with VBG, Vihara Buddha Gautama, they were formerly the late Bante Dhammavudo, Luangpo Dhammavudo, used to go around collecting alms. And those of you who have been there, I have been there many, many times. We know that in the morning, Bhante Dhammavudo with his monks will go out, collect the alms. Then we would have our lunch, early lunch, 11 o'clock. We would eat, and by 11:30 finish eating. All the leftover food, well, not really the leftover as in eaten, but the food that was not consumed, the extra food, we would pack it up into bags, pack it up into containers, and send it to poor villages, send it to old folks' home, and send it to various households that are very poor. So this is really what happens, that the poor people will eat the unconsumed food, not leftover as in eaten, but uneaten, excess food. So we were doing that at VBG, Vihara Buddha Gautama, in those old days. Of course, I haven't been there in the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and also since Luangpo Dhammavudo passed away, I have not returned there. He passed away just about 2 years ago. Okay, all right. So I was just relating a real life example that we have. So here, poor people will receive the remnants of food from monastery. Right? So therefore, when they saw Mahadugata enter the monastery, and this was before the dana was completed, people were still receiving the dana. Normally, Mahadugata will go into the monastery after they finish the meal so that he could collect the leftover food. But now they see Mahadugata entering the monastery before the dana started, before the meal was started. And all these wealthy people, right, the royal family and the kings and the senior people, the ministers, they were quite unhappy to see him. And they said to him, Mahadugata, this is not mealtime. Why do you come here? Because they know that he was a collector of leftover food. So they were, in a way, a little bit upset to see him come so early. They didn't know the reason for him to be there. So there was a lot of discussion going on, and some of these people were kind of looking down on Mahadugata, right? I don't know whether they tell him to go away, but I think they were not happy to see him because the meal hasn't started yet. Okay, so then Mahadugata did not leave the monastery. In fact, he proceeded to the perfume chamber where Kassapa Buddha was in there preparing for the alms. So in preparing to receive alms. So Kassapa Buddha, actually at that moment, Kassapa Buddha had just finished bathing, because after the morning meditation, they bathe and get ready for the alms, receiving alms. So in this case, Kassapa Buddha was a little bit late. So by the time Mahadugata arrived, Kassapa Buddha had not yet taken his meal yet. He is about to receive the alms, but he has not done so yet. Okay. So Kassapa Buddha, of course, these Sammasambuddha, these supremely enlightened Buddha, they can read people's mind. So he knew what was happening actually. So he opened the door of the perfume chamber and he brought down his bowl and he placed it in the hands of Mahadugata, meaning he was asking Mahadugata, you may now offer alms food to me. So Mahadugata was so happy, you know. It was as though Mahadugata had received the glory of a universal monarch. I mean, all the kings, all the prince, all the ministers, all the senior people, all the rich people, they were wishing that Kasapa Buddha would give the alms bowl to them so that they could offer the alms food to Kasapa Buddha himself. But no, Kasapa Buddha gave that bowl to Mahadugata to offer the alms food. Wow, you know. So Mahadugata was so pleased. So there was a long discussion, commotion, long story short, okay, the rich people, the ministers, the wealthy, and the senior people wanted to take the bowl away from Mahadugata. Of course, they can't snatch it away because it was given to him by Kasapa Buddha. They cannot take it away. But they were convincing him. They were asking him, please, can I have the bowl from you? And they were even offering him money. They say, I will give you 1,000 pieces of gold. Give me that bowl. They were doing that, but Mahadugata refused to accept anything. He knew that having this alms bowl from Kasapa Buddha is such a great blessing. He's not going to give it away. So he refused, even though he was offered so much money. Right? And Kasapa Buddha, of course, received the alms food from Mahadugata, because by that time, you know, Saka, who pretended to be a cook, cooked the food already, and presumably together with the wife of Mahadugata. So now the food is available, and now Kasapa Buddha had the food to eat. So he finished his meal and he returned to his chambers, and the alms givers were now asked to go home. End of story. End of alms giving. Everybody now go home. And Mahadugata received that blessing. So this is also a kind of supreme blessing. I mean, rarely does a person get the honor to offer alms food to Sammasambuddha himself. Usually the kings have such honor, right? The senior people have such honor. But in this case, it is the poorest man in the village that had that honor. Okay. And of course, Saka had done his job. Saka did help Mahadugata a lot, right? Stopped at the door of Mahadugata's house and looked up at the sky, okay? And as Saka looked up to the sky, it's amazing. The sky started to rain jewels and gold pieces and all these expensive things, and rain onto the house of Mahadugata. Thereupon, down came from the sky a rain of 7 kinds of jewels, which filled the vessels in the house of Mahadugata. And the house itself was filled with these precious things. So now, Mahadugata had become very wealthy. He's no longer Mahadugata, so to speak. He's no longer the poorest man in the village. He had become very wealthy, but not from the bribery of the wealthy people, but from the merits he had accumulated and the good deeds of Saka, chief of the Tavatimsa realm. Okay, so this is the story of this Mahadugata. Fast forward. Okay. Okay, let's go back to what Kasapa Buddha declared. Right here, those 4 types of people that Kasapa Buddha declared. So let's review this. It's an important lesson to all of us. So Kasapa Buddha said, the first kind, he himself gives alms, but does not urge others to give. That man in his future states of existence received the blessing of wealth, but not the blessing of retinue. So if you are generous, you will receive the blessing of wealth. But because you did not encourage other people to be equally generous, you would not receive the blessing of retinue. And the second declaration, another man urges others to give but does not himself give. That man receives in his future states of existence the blessing of a retinue, but not the blessing of wealth. So if you encourage other people to donate and do good, but you yourself don't do, you will not receive the blessing of wealth, but you will receive the blessing of retinue. Retinue, okay? That means followers, listeners, and admirers, right? Retinue. And another man neither himself gives nor urges others to give. That man in his future states of existence receives neither the blessing of wealth nor the blessing of retinue, but lives as an eater of remnants. So you will take leftover food. You will not enjoy the benefit of wealth. Now, this is probably what happened to Mahadugata in his previous lives, that he was not giving and not helping others. So in this existence as Mahadugata, in the earlier part, he was so poor, right? He was eating remnants. Right? Finally, the fourth declaration is, another man not only himself gives, but also urges others to give. That man in his future states of existence receives both the blessing of wealth and the blessing of retinue. So this is very important lesson for us. Not only that we should do good, not only that we should do charity, not only that we should offer alms to the monks in the temples and monastery, we should also encourage other people to do likewise. So if you are doing charity, feel free to encourage other people to help you to go along and do the same charity. And you will then benefit in both ways, the blessing of wealth and the blessing of a retinue. You don't have to wait for the next life. Even in your existing life, you will experience that, as what Mahadugata did. He experienced the blessing of wealth. Okay. So now, fast forward. Now that was during the time of Kassapa Buddha, Mahadugata. So he had done a lot of meritorious deeds, and over many lifetimes since then, from the time of Kassapa Buddha until the time of Gautama Buddha, right, to that Buddha, Gautama Buddha. Okay, so during those many lives, many rebirths, he had been reborn wealthy. He had been reborn doing a lot of good. So he had accumulated a lot of merits. So this Mahadugata, in the subsequent lives, accumulated a lot of good merits. And to cut the long story short, there's a long story about his affinity with Saka. The two of them had a lot of affinity. So eventually, Mahadugata, in the previous life, just before this one, was born in the realm of the Devas, Tavatimsa. Now, at the time of Gautama Buddha, he was reborn as a human, right, called Pandita. So now the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, now we're talking about Gautama Buddha, not Kassapa Buddha anymore. So this is the time of Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha gave this religious instruction while in residence at Jetavana Monastery, in reference to a young novice monk, Pandita. Pandita is one of the future existences of Mahadugata. And in other words, just before he was born as Pandita, he was actually born in the Deva realm, the Tavatimsa realm. Now, at the time of Gautama Buddha, he was now born in the human realm. Okay, so Pandita was a young son of a rich man in Savatthi, who was accepted into the order as a novice monk at age 7. So Pandita, as a young child, and just a reminder, He is the rebirth of Mahadugata, and many lives accumulating a lot of merits. Now born as a young son in a very wealthy family, and his name was given as Pandita. Now there's a story behind why he was named Pandita. See, the parents of Pandita, before Pandita was born, the parents were wealthy, but the servants, they worked very hard, they were very poor, and they were not so happy. So when the mother of Pandita was carrying Pandita in her womb, during that time, right, everybody felt so happy because they knew that this baby was going to be born, and somehow they felt the blessing already. So the whole household that used to have a lot of servants who are very dumb and ignorant, they started becoming quite smart. So in other words, during the time when the mother of Pandita was carrying the child in her womb, the servants who were dumb and ignorant started becoming very smart. And that's why when the child was born, the parents who continuously dana to the monks invited the Venerable Sariputta to come and name the baby. And Sariputta named this baby Pandita, meaning wise one, the wise one. Right? Pandita means a wise person. Okay, so this is the background to this. Long story, I'm cutting it all short. And this child, Pandita, since he was born from a very young age, wanted to be a monk. And in those days, the youngest age they are allowed to be accepted as a novice monk was age 7. So by the time he turned 7, the parents offered him to the order of monks to become a novice monk. Right? They cannot be fully ordained until they reach the age of 21. So from age 7 until 21, they would be novice monk, samaneras. Okay, so when the parents offered Pandita as a novice monk, there was a small little ordination ceremony. So the mother and father of Pandita went to the temple and continued to offer alms to all the monks for 7 days in a row. The first 7 days of Pandita's novice monkhood. So the first 7 days of Pandita becoming a novice monk, the mother and father daily basis was offering alms to all the monks in the monastery for first 7 days. Okay, and on the 8th day, they take a break. So the parents went back home, and then on the 8th day, now because Sariputta, Venerable Sariputta, is the one who named Pandita, Venerable Sariputta became Pandita's preceptor. Right, so he was in charge of training Pandita. So on the 8th day, Venerable Sariputta decided to take Pandita, Samanera Pandita, to go out, do alms, collect alms food, so that he learns how to do that. And Pandita at that age was quite blur, so he didn't know many things. So he was stumbling and fumbling here and there. And Sariputta continuously was training him. Right? But he was a very good student. Remember that Pandita had accumulated a lot of good merits in his past life, going back to the time when he was Mahadugata. Okay, so on the 8th day they went out. Pandita followed Venerable Sariputta on alms round and came across farmers channeling water through the canals into the fields so that they could actually irrigate, right, the paddy fields. And because Pandita is young and not very knowledgeable, he was curious. So he asked Venerable Sariputta, he says, can water, which has no sentience, no consciousness, no reasoning, be guided to wherever one wishes? So in other words, can we guide water to anywhere we want? And of course, he saw the irrigators doing that, the farmers doing that. And of course, Venerable Sariputta said, yes, of course, water can be guided. Okay, so Venerable Sariputta replied, yes, it can be guided to wherever one wishes. That means a person can guide water to whatever fields they want, right? By digging up channels and so on. So they moved on continuously going around for the alms round. And then the next place, the novice monk, Pandita, saw fletchers heating bamboo with fire to straighten the bamboo and make them into arrow shafts. So he saw these workers using bamboo, heating the bamboo, and then straightening it so that they can make arrow shafts out of it to shoot arrow. Right? Again, Pandita asked the same questions about the shaping of bamboo, which is without sentience. So he asked Venerable Sariputta, this bamboo that is without sentience or reasoning or consciousness, can they be shaped into these objects of arrow shaft? Can they all be shaped into anything we want? And of course, Venerable Sariputta said yes. Then they move on. Further on, Pandita came across carpenters who were cutting wood, carving wood from tree trunks and carving them and cutting them and shaping wood into useful objects such as cart wheels, tables, right? Whatever they wanted to make with wood, shaping wood into useful objects. And again, Pandita asked the same question. Can wood without sentience be shaped into useful objects? Right? So now Pandita, remember Pandita is only 7 years old. So now he has learned so many new things in life. Then he thought to himself, if water, which is without sentience and the power of reasoning, can be guided to wherever one desires, if crooked bamboo, which is without sentience and reasoning power, can be straightened, and if timber, which is without sentience, can be made into useful objects, why should I, having sentience and the power of reasoning, not able to train my mind to strive to attain arahantship? So it was a very intelligent connection he made. He says that if water can be guided to wherever one wants, right? If bamboo can be straightened into arrow shafts, and if wood can be carved into useful objects, why can't I, having the intelligence and the sentience, be able to shape my mind, carve my mind, right, to become an arahant eventually? So he knew it is possible. I can do that to myself. So such a young child having this intelligence, but do remember, this is accumulated from his past lives of a lot of meritorious deeds that he had done in past lives, okay? So then, having thought that, there and then, he asked Sariputta for permission. Venerable Sir, please, can I return to the monastery? Can I give up alms round, go back to the monastery and spend that time meditating diligently, because I want to shape my mind. I want to craft my mind. I want to be like the carpenter doing it to the wood. Now I want to do it to my mind. I want to shape my mind. I want to cultivate my mind. Of course, Sariputta allowed him to go back to the monastery. Okay, so back at the monastery, Pandita went back to his room. In fact, there's a bit of a story about he wanted peace of mind, so he didn't go to his room. He went to Sariputta's room because that would be secluded. He will not have other monks disturbing him. Right? So Pandita ardently sat there and diligently practiced meditation. And he started by contemplating the body. Right? And basically that is the Kayanupassana. Right? So he was contemplating the body. Then there are also other contemplations of the body and so on. So he started with that. It doesn't matter what he was doing. He was very ardently and diligently cultivating and meditating in deep meditation. And at that time, remember, his past lives, he had accumulated a lot of good merits plus a lot of affinity with Saka. Right, the ruler or the chief of the Tavatimsa Devaloka. So Saka noticed that. because Saka and all the past lives of Pandita, going back to Mahadugata, Saka and that being actually already had built up a history of a lot of affinity. So Saka, noticing Pandita now striving for it, summoned all the devas and said, let us now make this monastery so peaceful and quiet and still, so that it does not disturb Pandita intent on meditating to higher attainment. So Saka summoned all the devas to cooperate and get everything to still. So in other words, all the wild animals will stay away, and the monks would not come and disturb them, so that he has peace and quiet to do his meditation. Right? And before mealtime, so before Sariputta was able to return from the alms round, novice monk Pandita had already attained the third level of attainment, Anagami. So in his meditation, he entered into Sotapan, Sakadagami, and now he had reached Anagami, the third level, one stage below Arahantship. Okay. At that time, Sariputta returned. And of course, he collected all the alms food, and he knows that it's time for lunch. So Sariputta collected the alms food. He took the bowl. See, when Pandita left Sariputta, he passed the bowl to Sariputta and he went off. So now Sariputta had the bowl of Pandita. So Sariputta put the food into the bowl, Pandita's bowl, and was going to take it back to his quarters to give it to Pandita for his meal. But that would disturb Pandita, who is now at the verge of attaining arahantship, because he has already meditated to the state of anagami. And the Buddha saw this. The Buddha knew what was going on with his psychic power. He saw what Pandita was doing. He knew the past lives of Pandita and all the merits that he had accumulated, and knew that he was now ready. He saw that Pandita had attained anagami fruition, and that if Pandita continued to meditate in peace and quiet, undisturbed, he would attain arahantship. So Buddha realized that if Sariputta went to the quarters and opened the door, he would have interrupted and disturbed Pandita, and that would not be good, because Pandita is now on the verge of attaining arahantship. So the Buddha decided to prevent Sariputta from entering. Now, one thing about Buddha, he does not directly tell people, you do this, you don't do this. He doesn't. He went to the door and sort of intervened so that Sariputta would not enter the room. And he started talking to Sariputta. He stopped Sariputta from entering the room where the novice monk was meditating. And the Buddha started asking Sariputta some questions, so that Sariputta will be busy answering the question and will not be going into the room. So the Buddha went to the door and kept Sariputta engaged in conversation by putting forth some questions to him. And while the conversation was taking place, so in other words, during the course of these questions and answers between Buddha and Sariputta, Pandita inside the room had now successfully attained arahantship, because he was not disturbed. In other words, when he went into deep meditation, he started and entered into Sotapan, Sakadagami, Anagami, and that was when Sariputta came back. And then, without any disturbances, he went on to become arahant. He had now attained arahantship. So now, novice monk Pandita had attained arahantship on the 8th day after becoming a novice monk. Amazing, huh? Thereafter, the Buddha said to the monks at the monastery, so because now everybody heard what had happened, so they all gathered around, and the Buddha then made these statements. He says, when one is earnestly practicing the Dhamma, Even Saka and the Devas give protection and keep guard. I too have kept Venerable Sariputta engaged at the door so that novice monk Pandita would not be disturbed. The novice monk, having seen the farmers irrigating their fields by channeling water, the fletchers straightening arrow shafts with fire, and carpenters making cartwheels and useful objects out of wood, tames his mind and practices the Dhamma. He has now become an Arahant. Okay? And that's when the Buddha uttered this verse. Irrigators channel water. Fletchers straighten arrow shafts. Carpenters shape wood. The wise restrain and develop themselves. Okay? So this is Dhammapada verse 80. Right? And the second lesson here is that, remember, when Pandita was going around seeing the irrigators, he connected the cause and effect. He connected. And when he saw the fletchers straightening arrow shafts, he also connected that it can, you do this, something happens. So that is the connection he made. And he saw the carpenters shape wood, right? And then therefore, the wise would be able to develop themselves. So the lesson here is that if we observe cause and effect, conditions and outcome, we can learn something from that, and that will help us gain this wisdom, panya, right? Understanding of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And this is the development of ourselves. We can develop ourselves. Now, this Dhammapada verse actually appeared in 3 or 4 different places in the Dhammapada. I'm going to show you another one. 145. It's almost identical, the same verse, with only one small difference. The last part, the conscientious restrain themselves. Whereas if you go back to the previous one, it says, the wise restrain and develop themselves. Now this other verse, 145, the conscientious restrain themselves. And in this 145, there is also a story behind it, almost identical. I don't know why these two stories are almost identical. It may or may not be referring to the same person. I'm not too sure. The novice monk, again, same thing. 7 days novice monk. On the 8th day, went out and saw all these things, came back. His name was Sukha. Sukha refers to a body that is at ease, right? A comfortable body. That is the meaning of the word Sukha. Pandita is a smart person and a wise person. And Sukha is a very calm person. That's what Sukha meant. So the novice monk Sukha, again, also became an Arahant on the 8th day. Exactly the same story, but the background was a little bit different because the other background was about Mahadugata and Saka. Okay. So if you compare these two verses, there's only one word that is different. Pandita. Pandita happens to be the name of the person it was referring to, but it also means wise person. And the other one is Subhata. Subhata means conscientious person, righteous person, a good person, right? A person who is perfected his practice of sila, okay? Whereas Pandita is a person who has perfected the practice of panya. Right? So but it is all interconnected. You perfect sila, and eventually it leads to samadhi, it leads to panya. Okay. So these two verses have only this slight difference. So I won't explain the story behind 145. It's more or less the same story. Okay. So now let's examine verse 18 in more details. Irrigators certainly means surely will happen. Directing water, channeling water. And then fletchers will be shaping or forming or bending bamboo shafts to become arrow shafts. Okay. And carpenters will be working on wood. And therefore the wise ones would be able to restrain and develop themselves. So this is what this verse is about. All right, that is verse 80. Now, verse 145, the word that is different is subata instead of pandita. And here, subata meant the conscientious person, the righteous person. And subata. Su means very high level, advanced. Bata. Bata came from the word sila bata paramasa. Here, bata meant righteous, right? Good, conscientious, right? So subata means a person who is highly conscientious, right? So that's basically it. We still have a little bit of time. I'm going to show you a video here, okay? And this is basically talking about the power of observation and seeing and connecting cause and effect and connecting conditions that lead to outcome. So let me share with you a video on this thing about how Siddhartha, when he was a child, he was able to connect what he observed.
So when at the age of 9 his father allowed him out to celebrate the annual ploughing festival, he eagerly participated. His first glimpse of reality beyond the palace walls would open a door for Siddhartha to a new vision of the world and would become the turning point of his life. The story recalls that he watched a farmer ploughing. He saw the toil and effort, struggle and repetition of this back-breaking work, something he'd never seen in the palace. He managed to slip away from the festivities and be alone. This first experience of real life had a profound effect upon him. To everyone else, this was a celebration, but to Siddhartha, it symbolized something quite different. He felt his mind leading him into a contemplative state. He watched the plough as it cut and parted the ground, and noticed a bird eating a freshly unearthed worm. He asked himself why living beings have to suffer in this way. If the farmer had not been ploughing, the bird would not have eaten the worm. He realized that everything was connected and that all actions had consequences. This simple observation would become one of the cornerstones of his teachings, known as karma. As Siddhartha's mind focused on these profound thoughts, he slipped into a trance or jhana, a mental state which would become his first step on the road to enlightenment.
He was sat under a tree and he just focusing on the plough going through the earth. And it's said that while doing that, he fairly naturally went into a meditative state called the first jhana, which was very, very joyful and happy, and which he later uses as part of his spiritual path. The connection to Buddhist meditation is the focusing on something, which has a calming, centering effect. Possibly also the idea of compassion for the worms being killed as the plough went through the earth.
Okay, so what have we learned? Young Siddhartha, as a child, he observed in this in the field, observed the cause and effect in action. So when the farmers were ploughing, and because of the ploughing, earthworms were unearthed. The earthworms were drawn to the surface, and because earthworms were drawn to the surface, the birds came and ate them. Okay, so there's a connection. Observing the ploughing activity, and as he observed that and made that connection, his mind was becoming wiser. He was actually developing panya, right, wisdom. So as he was developing wisdom at that very young age, then his mind went into a jhanic state, a jhana, and then focusing attention on his own profound thoughts. So he was actually now examining his mental experience. In this examination is called Dhamma Vichaya. Right? There's a second of the 7 steps to awakening. Satabojjhanga. So Dhamma Vichaya is the examination of your cognitive experiences. What your mind is experiencing, you're able to experience how thoughts arise and so on. So this is Dhamma Vichaya. So at that tender age, young Siddhartha was already able to do that. Okay. And therefore he had cultivated this insightful comprehension of karma, realizing how things arise and fade, the anicca, the dukkha, anatta, connecting it all together, and he had a full comprehension of karma. Okay. So with that, I end my presentation. I think there's one question here from Sister Jeanette. Thank you very much for your question. Very happy to see you. Sister Jeanette is in Philippines. Okay, your question. What Mahadugata have that he was helped by Deva Saka? Okay. Very good question. Basically, the question is, what made Saka come and help Mahadugata? First, Saka saw Mahadugata and realized the good intention of Mahadugata. Despite Mahadugata himself being so poor, right, and not having any means to sponsor a monk, he agreed to sponsor one monk even when he didn't have any ability to sponsor it. And then he and his wife went out and worked very hard to earn some wages to be able to sponsor that one monk. And because of that, Saka noticed. So in other words, this basically points to the understanding that these devas in the higher realms, right, they can look down look down on us and see what we are doing, and they are attracted to goodness. In the same way, you imagine yourself as a human being. You walk around the street and you see cats and dogs. When you see cats and dogs, they say a couple of cats playful. They are playing with each other and the cats are very happy, right? They're having a good time. You feel good. You want to go near them. But if you were to walk down the street further on and you see a couple of dogs, they are fighting each other, they are biting each other, would you like to go near them? Would you like to pet them? Of course not. You stay away from them. If you can help stop one dog from harming another dog, fine, but you are not attracted to them. But if you see the cats, two little kittens, very playful, happily playing, you are attracted to them. In the same way, the devas in the higher realm looking down on the humans, seeing that humans do good, they are attracted to people who do good. This is the understanding. Of course, this is not written as a law, but it is an understanding that good acts of merits will attract the devas. And this is also mentioned in the Metta Nisamsa Sutra, where the Buddha pointed out 11 benefits from practicing metta: goodwill, universal benevolence, right, loving kindness. When we practice that, there are 11 benefits. 2 of them relate to the devas. First, it attracts the devas. The devas will like us. Secondly, the devas will protect us, right? So this is really what has happened, that Mahadugata had such good intentions and was doing so well, it attracted the attention of Saka. So I hope that answers your question, sister. Okay. And we have another one from Sister Evelyn. Is this the only case where a novice monk attained arahantship, or within such a short time, 8 days after ordination? As I pointed out, in the Dhammapada alone, there were 2 cases, but there are many, many cases of novice monk becoming arahant. But in this case, at only 7 years old. So Pandita is found in Dhammapada verse 80. The other one, Sukha, novice monk Samanera Sukha, also 7 years old, becoming arahant, is found in Dhammapada verse 145. Okay, So the answer, yes. And there are multiple, not only these two, there are several other instances. So therefore, during the time of the Buddha, because they were learning directly from teachers like Sariputta, who was himself an Arahant. So if their teacher is an Arahant, then they are being able to be coached to become an Arahant. Okay. Next question from Sister Evelyn. Besides merits, what brings Saka and Buddha to come and help him in his training practice? What are the criteria or past deeds that help Venerable Pandita to attain Arya and later Arahantship in such short time? Okay. I cannot answer definitely because firstly, this is basically based on commentary in the Dhammapada. But according to the commentary in the Dhammapada and also the story that I told you, over many lives, right? Pandita was many lives ago during the time of Kassapa Buddha. Pandita was that time born as a very poor person, Mahadugata, very poor person, the poorest person in the village, Mahadugata. But because of the meritorious deed he did, he started establishing an affinity with Saka. Right? Saka noticed how meritorious he was in offering to the monks, going out of his way to do that. So he attracted Saka, and then they developed this affinity over many lives. Saka and the early lives of Pandita or the later lives of Mahadugata, they had been connected to the point where Pandita in the previous life, before he became Pandita, he was actually in the realm of the Tavatimsa together with Saka. They were good, you could say they were good friends. So in other words, meritorious acts will attract. And Sammasambuddha, the supremely enlightened Buddha, they are able to see, and you will read in many sutras every morning, and in this case it's about Gautama Buddha. When the Buddha first rises, he goes into deep meditation, and when he comes out of his deep meditation, the first thing the Buddha does is he scans around and see what's happening around him, and then he can see who has been doing meritorious deeds and who has been doing evil deeds. The Buddha knows, because he's the supremely enlightened Buddha. So I hope that answers your question, that when they see somebody doing meritorious things, they will want to go towards that person to help that person. The criteria would simply means think good, speak good, do good. That is the criteria. And expressed in real life is avoid evil, do good, purify your mind. Okay, so that's really simply put, that is it. If we live our life by these principles and abide by the 5 precepts, we will be doing well. And if you have a pure heart, a good heart, doing meritorious deeds, you will be attracting the attention of the devas in the higher realm. On the other hand, if you are doing evil deeds, you will be attracting the attention of evil beings, the asuras and the maras. Okay, so basically this is I hope this answers your question. It's not a short time, not in such a short time. Pandita had been cultivating over countless lives from the time of Mahadugata, accumulating merits after merits, life after life, until he reached the point of Pandita. And that was the ripening time for him to attain Arahantship. In the same way, we all know the story of Siddhartha in his very long previous life during the time of Buddha Dipankara. Prince Siddhartha at that time was born as an ascetic by the name of Sumedha. And since then, he had basically diligently cultivated the 10 perfections, the 10 paramis, and life after life until he was born as Prince Siddhartha, then he had already accumulated a lot of good merits. So by the time he was born as Prince Siddhartha, he was ready to become supremely enlightened Buddha. So all this is not short time, not quick within one lifetime. All these are accumulated over many lifetimes. So this is an important lesson for all of us, to accumulate goodness life after life. Don't stop doing good. Okay, there's another question here. How come Pandita from being Deva reincarnate to human? Well, this is basically very important point. People who do good, and because of the merits, they are reborn in the higher realm. Now, when a time is ready for them to become enlightened, they will have to descend down to the human realms to become enlightened. And this is what happened to Siddhartha. Just before he was Siddhartha, he was up in the Deva realms. Then he was reborn as a human being, because to become an Arahant, there are only two places one can become an Arahant. Born as a human, you cultivate and perfect yourself, and you enter the stream, you become a Sotapan, then you can become an Arahant within 7 human lifetimes. 7 human lifetimes, you will become an Arahant. And if you cultivate further and become Sakadagami, then within 1 human lifetime, you will become an Arahant. So if a person who has cultivated himself to the point of becoming a Sakadagami, the 2nd level, when he passes away, he's not yet an Arahant, but the next time he's born as a human being, he can become an Arahant. But meanwhile, if he had done a lot of meritorious deeds and he passed away as Sakadagami, he could be reborn in the Deva realm until a time when he is ready to become an Arahant as Sakadagami. He will then descend to the human realm one more time, once returner, descend to the human realm, and then become Arahant there. So these people who descend from the heavenly realm to the human realm and then become Arahant, perhaps you could say that that point in time, they had already become Sakadagami once returner. That means come back to human life one time and become an Arahant. However, when you are in the last human life, you now cultivate to the level of Anagami. And just before you are able to attain Arahantship, something happened to you, accident or whatever, and you pass away, right? You will be reborn in a very high Brahma realm called Sudavasa. And there, you will never come back as a human. You're non-returner. Anagami are non-returner. They will never come back to the human realm. If they don't attain Arahantship, they will be reborn in the Sudavasa realm. And from there, when they pass on, they become Arahant. Okay? So this is really what has been taught and what we understand. So I hope that answers your question about this coming back as a human, right? We have another question from Sister Jeanette. How come Pandita from being Deva to human Pandita? Is there an account that Deva become enlightened too? Okay, on the first question, I think I already answered that from Deva, they descend to the human realm and then become enlightened. That I already answered that. Is there an account that Deva become enlightened too? Now, a Deva, in order to finally reach Arahantship, has to be reborn as a human. Devas in the Deva realm cannot be enlightened. They cannot reach Arahantship there. They have to be reborn as a human, and if they are able to attain Arahantship as human, they will become the Arahant and pass away. End of story. Never come back. But if they reach Anagami state and they are not able to attain Arahantship, they die, they will be reborn in the Sudavasa realm. And only in the Sudavasa realm. Now, those are not Devas anymore. They are very high-level Brahmas. So in the Sudavasa realm, then they would become Arahant. Okay? So the answer to this about Devas, no. Ordinary Devas, they cannot become Arahant in the Deva realm. They have to come down to the human realm. So I hope that answers your question. I think there are no more other questions that I can see. Okay, so right, so we have come to the end of our sharing then, And we have spent this 1.5 hours together very productively, accumulated a lot of good merits. It's good to accumulate these merits also. So let us, and we know that many people around the world are suffering. So let us put our palms together and share the merits with the people who are suffering from this coronavirus pandemic. Let's put our palms together and recite together. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dhamma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining us. I wish you well. May you stay safe. May you be well, comfortable, peaceful, and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.